Hello, if you're watching this video, then you were one of the ones that missed the formal assessment the first time round. And I would just advise you to always try and attend the initial formal assessment, okay? I purposely select the papers really carefully, not to be really, really hard, so you haven't necessarily had an easier paper, but just to reflect as closely as possible the true exam, and also to truly assess your progress and how you are doing. So your formal assessment wasn't as good. You'd already seen the question before. The questions weren't quite as clear. It was a specimen paper rather than an actual past paper. The question about synaptic transmission is unlikely to come up as it is. It would probably be more complex, so the excitation and inhibition, so you can't test your knowledge of that lesson and how it went. So it is really, really important to attend the formal assessment, the initial formal assessment. Plus it means that we don't spring it on you in class where you're always not going to do as well as if you were prepared and you knew and you could work towards it. So if you didn't get the grade you wanted, then part of that could be because we had to spring it on you just when we had chance to see you. Okay, right. Can you get a different pen? I'd like you to add in everything that you need to do differently. However, the really important thing here is that it's not just copying down exactly what the answers would be. What is more important is that you make notes on the skills. So if you miss a mark, you will never get that question again. However, what you will get is the question that requires the same skills. So why not? Whilst I want you to be able to tell me the content of why you didn't get the mark, also the skill that made you miss the mark. Okay. Question E is the vesicles. Box 1, E is the vesicles. The little balls inside them are the neurotransmitters, and D is the receptors. Okay, so it is a bit of a tricky one. You do have to look carefully, but they're not pointing at the circles, the neurotransmitters. They're pointing at the vesicles, which have neurotransmitters inside them, and D is the receptors. Okay, explaining synaptic transmission. So look at all of these things and then I'll tell you what you've kind of missed. You need a beginning, a middle and an end. So you could have a really, really detailed process, but if you don't have that ending where you talk about reuptake, then unfortunately you are limited to 3. So you talk about an electrical impulse or action potential reaching the postsynaptic terminals. The electrical impulse then triggers the release of neurotransmitters into the synaptic gap. They cross the synapse and they bind to the receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. The neurotransmitters then return to the synaptic gap and are reabsorbed in a process called reuptake. And then you could have got credit any relevant material there. So if you did talk about summation, you could have got the marks. However, you'd still need to mention reuptake at the end of it. So you didn't need to do that. Because that takes a lot of time and information. If it's just a 4 mark, if it was a 6 marker, definitely summation. Also a labelled diagram. So, but the direction of the transmission would need to be made clear. No one used a diagram, and that's fine, but you could have done. And it would need to be labelled and explained in detail. And for 4 marks, like it said, beginning, middle, it must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay. Question 3, for the operationalised DV, number of verbal errors. Question 1, not operationalised, so verbal fluency. Question 4, you get 1 mark for making sure your hypothesis structure is correct, 1 mark for operationalising the IV, and 1 mark for operationalising the DV. So can you identify each one of those? So there is a difference, there is no difference, there will be a relationship, well actually not relationship because it's not a correlation, but you could have directional or non-directional, that's fine. You must mention the number of verbal errors, so can you find that and tick it if you got 3 marks, and you must mention 5 listeners or 100 listeners, and if you didn't mention, can you find those and tick them? If you didn't mention them, that's where you didn't get the marks either. You get 1 mark for identifying the extraneous variable, and 1 mark for how to control it, and 1 mark for explaining how it would affect the DV. So how would the extraneous variable you've identified affect the number of verbal errors made? So I'd like you to, the key thing here is that it should have been contextualized. Can you highlight anything in the text that you have where you have contextualized? If you can't do that, then if you've got more than 1 mark, I was obviously feeling very generous because really shouldn't have got any marks. It's a really simple little bit of terminology. We couldn't credit gender or time to complete the task because gender's controlled for because it's matched. They were matched, and time to complete the task because you can't control for that. You can't make somebody finish in 5 minutes. minutes reading something. So for example, 1 mark, the article the participant was reading. How could it have been controlled for? The article would need to be the same for all participants. Otherwise, it would be difficult. The difficulty of the article could be affecting the number of verbal errors, not the audience number. So it's how it was affected by the DV, the number of verbal errors. Question 6, you get 1 mark for saying that ensures this sample is truly representative. Then your 2nd mark, because different types of people working in this company, again, it has to be contextualised. Can you highlight anywhere you've used that phrasing, are represented in the sample in the correct proportions? It's not equal, it's not 50-50, because it's not half men, half women. There are more men than women, I think, 60% men, 40% women. So you need to make sure about that. Oh, got the wrong way. Question 7, 1 mark for each of the following. So if you said any of these, then you got the marks. Put all 60 male names in a hat. Determine the proportions of males needed to mirror the number of males in the target population of 60. Work out 60% of 20 and draw 12, which equals 12, and draw out 12 names from the 60. Or assign each of the 60 men a number between 1 and 60. Or if you said put all of their names in a random name generator, that's the same thing. Determine the proportion of males needed, so 60%, and calculate 60% of 20, which is 12, and then randomly generate their name or the number that's associated with them. Okay, but the most important thing there is the 60% or the 40%. Question 8 marks a clear description of a practical way of randomly allocating the 12 men and the 8 women to the 2 conditions, and then you've got some suggestions on here. The most important thing to remember about this, it's not random sampling. We haven't got the target population and we're narrowing it down to the sample. We've got the sample and we are narrowing it down to, we're putting them into randomly allocating, so C for conditions, C for cating, best I can do, apologies. So randomly allocating them to the conditions, not to the sample. Okay, so target population, randomly sample them. We've now got the 20 people that we want, so we want to randomly allocate them into the 2 conditions. Give each man a number 1 to 12. Put 1 to 12 numbers in a hat. Again, you could just say their names and that's fine. And assign the first 6 numbers drawn to condition A with the remainder in condition B. What you must make clear, because you could say first number condition A, second number condition B, what you must make clear is that there would be an equal number in each. So they would, how would they end up with 6 in condition A and 6 in condition B? And then repeat the process for women. 8 numbers in the hat for first 4 condition A, second 4 condition B, or 1 condition A, next 1 condition B, and so on till they're all gone. Okay, so what I would like you to do now is reflect on how you've marked it, and I'd like you to identify 2 things that you would do differently or continue doing for either improved success or continued success. 1 must be exam based, so what would you do differently when you were sat in the exam with exam technique, the way that you read the questions, the way you answered them, what do you need to do? And then a second question, how would you approach, or how would you I was going to say differently, but you might do it the same if there's a certain revision technique. Would you carry on using the revision technique you've done, or do you need to try a slightly different one? Maybe one where you test your knowledge more rather than just reading your notes. Have you tried doing something different? If you've got all your notes written down, give yourself 5 minutes, write as many of your notes down as you can without your original notes, turn them back over and see what you've missed. Takes 5 minutes. It's far more effective than just reading things for 5 minutes. Okay.